Hi, everyone in the mainnet audience. My name is Matthew Getz. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Block Tower Capital. We're a crypto and digital asset investment firm. So we focus on investing, trading, and everything in between digital assets, derivatives thereof, safeguarding them. So a lot of these topics are very near and dear to my heart, including this opening topic around custody. So I'm a big fan of letting our distinguished guests sort of introduce themselves, but the names are Alex Batlin from Trustology, Trisha Lynn from Anchorage, Jerome Detiche, I think I got that, from Ledger, and Chris Metcalf from BitGo, but he did some things prior to that, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So we're all here. I think we're all connected through Hopin. Hope everyone is having a good time at the conference, and we're going to keep the steamroller plowing forward. So why don't I let each of the panelists say hello, talk a little bit about themselves, their background, what they're out here to solve in the industry, what they're working on, and then we can dive into some questions. I think for folks who are tuned in, the panel on the right-hand side that is called Session under the chat tab. If you want to pose a question, I like making things conversational, so feel free to throw questions into the session chat, and I'll try to keep an eye on that as we go. But why don't we say quick hellos from everyone? We'll start in the order of these squares on my screen. We have Chris first. We'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Chris Metcalf. I'm in product at BitGo here. I joined BitGo about a year ago as a part of an acquisition of a company I founded called Hedge. That was kind of in the blockchain infrastructure as a service and staking space. Since joining BitGo, I'm now a product manager for our custody platform, which kind of manages the wallets at BitGo and the kind of security layer around how funds move in and out of those wallets.
Next, we have Jerome.
Right. So my role at Ledger is fostering Ledger's client success in both the B2B with Ledger Vault and B2C side with Ledger Nano. That involves onboarding, support, services, adoption, advocacy, retention, and so on. I'll say my work boils down to managing a team of talented individuals that are voicing our clients' feedback internally and act as a valve train between sales, product, and engineering. In the past, I used to work for Ernst & Young, and I started the blockchain practice in France about 4 years ago. And I opened the Paris office of Consensus 3 years ago, where I was coordinating the efforts towards enterprise and public institutions in the European Union. And I had the pleasure to meet Alex Batlin back then.
Alex, on that note, we'll go to you.
Cool. Yeah. Hi, guys. I just realized I need a little bit more coffee. It's kind of like coming up to 10 and I'm starting to yawn, so I apologize. It's not the conversation for me. Yeah, hi, Alex Batlin, founder and CEO of Trustology. Had the pleasure of somewhat working with Jerome, not quite in the same geography. Founded Trustology, we're a custodial wallet provider, actually very much inspired by what BitGo and others did. Started out my kind of crypto career running the UBS Innovation Lab. Helped to found what's now called Finality, used to be Utility Settlement Coin. It's kind of tokenization of central bank money. Worked for BNY Mellon and then decided to try and do custody. So started up Trustology with Consensus, and then we spun out about a year and a bit ago. Under our own steam, and been going ever since. So been pretty exciting ride. I do everything that nobody else wants to do in the company. And that's, I think, the role of a CEO. So thank you.
Yeah. And last but not least,
Hey everybody, Trisha Lynn from Anchorage. I'm in business development and sales for Anchorage. A little bit of background on me. I was both on the buy side and the sell side. Joined crypto a few years ago, working on the buy side for a fund, realized the importance and the critical nature of infrastructure, found Anchorage just when the company had launched. And now I have the amazing privilege of speaking to some of the most sophisticated investors and market participants and sort of being in the forefront of the industry. So, hello.
Perfect. Actually, that's a good point that you guys made me think of. Let's do a quick location check. Where's everyone streaming live from? So I'll start. I'm in Florida at the moment. Where's and Alex, You referenced the time zone, so I think people can start to guess. But where is everybody? Chris, you go first, then Jerome, Alex, Trisha, same order.
Yeah, it's a little earlier for me. I'm in San Francisco here.
Okay. Jerome?
Paris.
Paris.
London.
London.
San Francisco.
All right. So we're missing the middle of the United States, but we've got the covered, and we've got the European connection. That sounds great. Actually, so this is actually bringing me back down memory lane quite a bit, because we've talked to friends and folks at these firms going back several years now to when we got started launching our fund and some of the things that we're doing, and we spent a lot of time with a number of folks from, I think, most, if not all, of your shops, including things like we co-authored a institutional investor's guide to digital asset custody with Anchorage, and a few other things. But Trisha, you made me think of this. Why don't we stay with you? I think a number of folks in the audience come from the crypto world, but a fair number of folks, from my understanding, when I hear about the mainnet sort of pie chart of attendees, also come from the world of traditional investors, allocators, institutions, professional investors who are non-crypto in nature. So I think in terms of just kind of high-level framing and setting the table, why don't you and others can add on to this as well? I want all questions to be kind of open field. Talk a little bit about some of the key differences between custody of digital assets, crypto assets versus traditional assets, and how investors are thinking about that.
Sounds good. And so this is a really new asset class. A lot of debate about whether or not it is an asset class. But what I will start with is two things: the similarities. From a custody perspective, custodians need to make sure that they're leveraging the best of modern security engineering to safeguard assets from loss. And for us, that means working backwards based upon the native characteristics of that specific blockchain or that asset class to make sure that the system is completely impenetrable to assets and those assets remain safe. And then the second thing is that's the same thematically, is that in the United States, the legal requirements for RAs to custody the QC still remain. What's really different is that from the perspective of the technology side is that the asset class is completely new and different. That means that the broad surface, the attack surface is much, much broader, many single points of failure. Volatility and the rapid appreciation of price makes very, very interesting ways for new types of attackers to try to penetrate systems. One-way irreversible nature of crypto and no central point of authority means that intrinsically there are higher barriers to entry for an institutional crypto native custodian to enter the market. And as a baseline, an institutional custodian needs the rigor and the depth of experience in security engineering. And in our view, the opportunity cost of not having the native crypto native and security expertise is too high to ignore or to take shortcuts on. The second thing is that from a legal perspective, regulators certainly care a lot about both possession and providing sole control of assets. And Anchorage is the only crypto native custodian that can provide exclusive control while avoiding online key exposure. By authenticating organizational intent, we acquire approval from multiple designated approvers. We make sure we use the best of modern security engineering to verify that every single person within that organization is approved biometrically and cryptographically via signatures. And so for us, the main difference and the problem that we're solving, to sort of summarize, is that we're enabling and empowering our clients to not have to make a trade-off between security and accessibility and the ability to generate yield on those assets.
Definitely. Any of the three of you guys want to add to anything she said in terms of kind of the current landscape and what's important for investors and others to know about digital asset custody and what it kind of entails at a high level?
Sure, I'll chime in. For me, crypto asset custody resembles a lot to storing digital bearer instruments, where you bear the instruments if you bear the key, hence the highly critical aspect of crypto asset custody. And like looking at the very title of this panel, is institutional custody ready for prime time? I would say that from a technical standpoint, as Trisha rightfully said, every single panelists here have built the product based on permanent considerations of institutional custody constraints, and moreover, we had to build a solution in a way more adverse environment than the traditional banking system. So I would say that from a technical standpoint, we are definitely ready, and in many places already deployed. But selling to a financial institution come with great challenges. Those institutions don't go read security and blockchain blogs and make their mind up saying, oh, well, MPC is not the right approach, and I should get myself an HSM where I can store my keys and enforce my operational processes and so on. So it simply don't happen like that. From my experience so far, a financial institution will benchmark providers, select a few, will be subjected to a compliance checklist and so on. And as an ecosystem of blockchain custody providers, we suddenly face uptime requirements, we have redundancies, SLAs, disaster recovery plans, and so on and so on. And so on. Sometimes it comes from the bank internal policy. Sometimes it comes from the local regulators. You have to play on your strength. You can come up with an insurance plan like we do as at Ledger. You can try to look for certifications, SOC Type 2, ISO 27001, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's kind of tough for maybe smaller players or new players. But we are all catching up really fast, and pretty soon I'm sure there won't be a blocker anymore to be able to say that this is an enterprise grade solution and it's safe for any financial institution to chime in. And maybe one thing that could come next is maybe a dire need for training. Let's just make sure that no new professional is left behind because of a lot of the security solutions that we've built sit on a basic yet essential understanding of blockchain technology and its best practices.
Yeah. Chris or Alex? Chris, looks like you're going to say something.
Yeah, sure. I can jump in there. Yeah, just like riffing on Jerome's few points there, that these being digital bearer assets, it presents new challenges that traditional firms haven't had to solve at this point. And we've seen at BitGo that there have been firms that have, dipped their toes in kind of the crypto landscape, gotten to market, but then realized, there's a whole set of challenges in the crypto industry and the custody space that it really takes a dedicated provider to address those. And for them to operate their existing business and take on custody is potentially too much for them. And so we're seeing folks looking into the market to see like who can we partner with that has dedicated teams and dedicated technologies to solve these new interesting problems that haven't been solved yet. And at BitGo and the folks on this panel, there's folks that are spending their lives dedicated to this product and so it's just interesting to see kind of the shift to want to be on the cutting edge and then maybe scaling back when they realize it was okay when we were securing, a small amount of assets, but now as the demand increases and the value in these wallets is increasing, maybe the technologies we had to store millions of dollars in wallets was okay, but that technology doesn't really hold up when we're talking about $1 billion wallet or maybe $1 trillion wallet. So that shift has certainly happened.
Yeah,
I think for the traditional custodians, also the game is really difficult because when I was at BNY Mellon, one of the challenges was to try and satisfy probably 20 plus instruction channels, literally from fax, phone, email, and one of the value propositions has always been they support clients almost no matter what the channel is. That raises the cost, but it also kind of includes a lot of clients and there's a particular price point. With crypto, it's digital only. So there's huge amounts of cost savings you can make because it is digital only. But if you actually put a digital only solution into an existing cost base, such as BNY Mellon, such as State Street, any of the cost advantages disappear very quickly. So there's an inherent incompatibility between traditional players and digital only, because if you dip the digital only into the old world, all of a sudden all the costs come back up, and a lot of the advantages that, frankly, blockchain talks about bringing into the overall mix with a digital-only rail just disappear. So you have to be really careful about how you approach this space. You have to really get your clients to accept digital-only, digital-first kind of processes. So number one. The second one is we have seen a Darwinian explosion in terms of asset classes. You know, most most people are used to managing 2-3 key asset classes with some variance. Look at the explosion in terms of fungible, non-fungible tokens. So the thing that we've learned is that I think going forward, you need to support not just utility token ERC20, but there's hundreds of different standards literally right now. So the way that the traditional custodians, which know how to custody a particular asset, work, doesn't work anymore. You need to know how to custody keys and how to do transaction management for almost any asset class. So then the architectural patterns are very different. You know, you go from custodying assets to custodying keys. So you're more of an account operator, speaking along old terms, rather than essentially a traditional custodian. So a lot of the legal regulatory implications all of a sudden start to change, and I think we've only started to understand the real difference between custody of keys versus custody of assets. And I think we just, you know, there'll have to be a few legal cases coming up to really prove who really owns the asset. Do you own the asset if you held the keys or not? If I have the keys to the card, does it mean that the card belongs to me? Well, hell no. So are those assets on the balance sheet or off balance sheet? And to be honest, none of that has been tested. You layer on top of that question, simple stuff, omnibus accounts and segregated accounts. I would argue if it's an omnibus account, it's probably on balance sheet. Why? Because it's very difficult in case of liquidation to segregate that, those asset classes away and kind of identify individual ownership. Segregated keys makes it a lot easier. And then you add DeFi to all of this, and that just blows the whole kind of thing out of the water, because all of a sudden with DeFi, omnibus doesn't work. Cold storage in the traditional sense with a 48-hour delay doesn't work. You have to be real time. You have to be segregated keys. Yet potentially the promise of DeFi gives us much bigger liquidity. Why? Because the old systems, you know, centralized exchanges, centralized lending, naturally people reduce the risk of single point of failure by fragmenting liquidity. But actually with DeFi, we can reduce the single point of failure risk through decentralization, but not through the fragmentation of liquidity. So if you project that forward, then in principle, if the theory holds up, the liquidity is going to be much deeper on decentralized platforms than centralized platforms. But now you have to deal with decentralized platforms along with a centralized platform as a custodian, plus multiple assets. So, I mean, we're just at the very beginning of really understanding what the hell this space means. And it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm glad that you brought up DeFi. For those in the audience who aren't familiar with the term, it stands for decentralized finance. It's a big area of focus kind of in the crypto world right now in terms of financial services and applications of crypto that can produce better versions of some of the traditional financial infrastructure that we have. So Alex, I'm glad you mentioned that. I do want to circle back to that. That's on my list of things to talk about as we go through here. One question I have for you guys, actually, you jogged me to think about this as you were talking. So we obviously, as an institutional fund, spent a ton of time thinking about and diligencing custodial solutions for the digital assets, for the crypto that we are entrusted with by our investors. And on top of that, my team, my co-founder and I, we come from the institutional world. So we've been investors and traders in markets. We've been LPs in hundreds and hundreds of fund managers. And so we had a very sort of high bar to evaluate kind of the providers in the space and some real kind of close insight. So we were on the ground with you all, you know, meeting in person, kicking the tires, understanding how you kind of put together your security processes. Because we did it ourselves for the first X amount of months or years since we launched our fund several years ago. And, you know, the trick for us was, yes, third-party custody is critical. As we continue to unlock more and more of this industry and this asset class for more investors and institutions and everybody else, having credible, trustworthy, institutional quality custodial solutions is one of those necessary obstacles that needs to exist but we're not going to do that until we effectively trust them, trust whoever's providing that service, effectively as much as we trust ourselves. And that's kind of a weird thing to say. How do you trust someone or something as much as you trust yourself? But there actually is a point where that becomes real and that becomes reality. And so we spent a lot of time kind of digging in the underwriting process of custodial solutions. And the good news, as evidenced by this panel, is we've reached that point. We've reached that point where, as institutional allocators, as now crypto fund managers, we see the credibility, the institutional quality, the kind of hurdles that needed to be cleared have been cleared for custodial solutions in this space. But that's our very close firsthand understanding of it. I think there's, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys are all doing this in the front lines. I think there's probably a lot of investors and institutions who look at this and see a bunch of what I'll call crypto native firms, which I think everybody on this panel represents. And then they'll see the firms they're used to hearing about: Boney Mellon, State Street, Northern Trust, JP Morgan, and a lot of them are looking to check the box, or a lot of them are thinking about, hey, if we're going to custody and own some crypto assets, are we doing it with someone that we have a high level of confidence is going to be a going concern, that is going to be around? The good news for most of the folks on this panel is I think you've all been around a pretty long time, at least in terms of kind of crypto years. But is that something you're hearing, and how are you helping investors kind of get comfortable with the kind of crypto native, which is clearly better from a security, bottoms up kind of first principle standpoint, and their need to check the box for the going concern or whatever other criteria they may need to be satisfying? Whoever wants to take that one can pick it up, but it's an interesting sort of gating question for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I can jump in there. Yeah, kind of going back to what I said earlier, you're right. Like, I think, at least in this space, the crypto native companies that truly understand the tech will naturally have a head start in terms of developing the technology that should eventually be trusted. What they lack is kind of that brand name and that traction that is developed, that trust that is developed over years. You know, it could take 25 years for a brand to develop trust, and a 1-minute attack where you lose that trust and that brand gets tarnished. So I think at least in the crypto industry, we certainly, we all feel at least the technology deserves the trust that, is warranted to it, but we potentially lack that track record, that brand recognition, but that is getting developed. You know, the longer we're around, the longer that we provide these solutions, that brand recognition, that brand trust will be developed amongst our client base. We are seeing, again, the traditional institutions that have that brand recognition doing the trade-off now is like, is this something we should be developing in-house, or should we be partnering with providers that focus on this? And maybe there's a white labeled solution where there is true crypto native deep tech behind the scenes, but presented with a brand that the retail and institutional folks know and trust already. And so you get that kind of brand loyalty, brand recognition out of the box.
I mean, I guess in the traditional custody space, it's been happening for a long time. You have the global custodians, which are effectively an aggregator over multiple local custodians. And those local custodians are either specializing in a particular asset class or in a particular geography. And therefore, I think kind of right now is just, frankly, the crypto environment is too tiny for them to worry about. But as and when it becomes more something they care about, I suspect the sub-custody model will be copied, because no one organization can span every single geography and every single asset class. People will always specialize. I think the same model will be copied over here, and that gives you that agility that a dedicated custodian can provide, which you need to, plus, frankly, the balance sheet to kind of protect you when things go wrong, which they always do. Right now, most crypto companies, including ourselves, do have that veneer of respectability for now through insurance. But as the big custodians come into play, realistically, they will provide that overlay in addition to insurance. So I think that's going to be a natural evolution in this space.
Yeah, on the, for old school custodian to come up with to blockchain custody solutions, I think it's going to be very hard for them to really catch up, because we see on the forefront, on the front end, you have a custody of keys. Like we do it at Ledger for the retail market, we do it for the enterprise market. It's complicated to get it right, and things always go wrong at some point. So even for us, like we have had our problems with a security conference that find vulnerabilities here and there. We try to find vulnerabilities in other devices. We are always trying to improve the stuff. So this is already highly specialized engineering, super tough to do. But after this, there is a hidden layer of complexity that gets often underestimated. That is the blockchain infrastructure behind this. So if you are like a BNY Mellon and you want to support, you want to build your own thing, and I understand you want to build your own thing because this is where the fun takes place. You get to build a product and maybe resell it, and it's like for everyone at this panel, like it's a tremendous adventure to build such products. But if you don't want to just support Bitcoin and Ethereum, you realize that running multiple blockchain nodes of multiple different blockchains and connecting them together, having everything at the same place, and also having to answer questions like, hey, when will you support this XYZ coin? And we need to support it because we have a big investor and you need to support it as well. Well, the node isn't running well, so what am I going to do? And you need to construct an explorer on top of it, make sure that everything goes right. The infrastructure behind it is often left aside, thinking that it's going to be easy to build, but it's actually pretty tough to build and maintain and run at scale. So I'll be curious to see if any big players from traditional custody makes a bold move in this direction.
Trisha, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would say our approach is to do everything in our power to make sure that those assets don't get lost. And I think the one thing that is really important that our clients value is the background and the security expertise of the founding team, building the security infrastructure behind companies like Square, Docker, and leveraging all those lessons to apply to this asset class. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that looking at the expanded use cases of what our clients use Anchorage for and how they're using it and the types of clients that come to us. When we launched, we were approached and understood the most by the crypto native funds. Today, that use case has expanded tremendously. Everyone from we help the native protocols themselves with treasury management and employee custody. We work with government institutions, payments companies, large enterprises, in addition to fintech companies and the banks, largest banks in the world, and the crypto native and non-crypto native VC and hedge funds. And so I think it's like building a library of different use cases for the product. And then leveraging the feedback that our clients provide us to continue building what the right product should be. And our use cases keep becoming more and more sophisticated in a pretty fast way.
Here's a little bit of a lightning round question. Do either of you have a data point on how much in kind of assets under AUM or assets under custody in the world of crypto and digital assets is currently sitting with third-party custodians? Do you have any idea what that industry size is at this moment?
Do you mean a third party as in I'm depositing this in an exchange, so I don't own the key? Like third party as you don't control the key?
Yeah, it gets tricky, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to include exchanges. I want to include people who are building custody solutions. Like I'm curious what the crypto custody kind of asset landscape looks like. Ballpark. Who's got a guess?
50 billion.
I do know that it's
50 billion.
It's more than exchanges.
Say it again.
It's more than that's held in exchanges, but my guess would roughly be around 40 or 50.
40 or
as
50
well.
billion. It's just interesting for the audience to hear that, there's real money here, and real money related to the overall size of the crypto market, which is obviously a fast-growing, important new asset class and technology. It's 5:30. Oh, go ahead.
Do you consider a Ledger Wallet as a third-party custodian?
I knew that's where your mind. I knew that's where your mind was going earlier.
Because we know for a fact that a lot of wealth in crypto space hold their crypto on retail devices, because they are personally rich and they don't see the point of taking an enterprise solution. I wouldn't take let's take a wild guess. I'd say 70% of the crypto market is held under secure devices, whether it is an HSM, whether it is an MTC breakouts, or whether it is hardware wallets. 70%.
I think the latest PwC research said that for the crypto funds that address, it's not a huge amount, but 2 billion in all assets, 81% have an independent custodian. So I wouldn't want to extrapolate that, but in terms of the asset management space, you're looking at, which is up from, I think, 53 or something like that % the year before. So we're seeing quite a jump in terms of independent custody, certainly in the institutional space.
Yep. For the audience's reference, the current market cap of crypto, depending on what you look at, is about $270 billion. Let's turn to regulation for a few minutes, and then I want to circle back to DeFi and some of the other things that we've already mentioned at a higher level. What's your guys' current view of regulation? Where do you think there's productive, constructive conversation happening for your businesses? Where are you most focused? Is it in the U.S.? Is it in the U.K.? Who are you working most closely with, and who do you think has the best understanding and appreciation for what custody of these assets is and what it represents? Because it's different than custodying stocks, bonds, things that the regulators are used to looking at. Let's start with Chris.
Yeah, in terms of regulation, I think I've been spending a lot of time on figuring out what we're going to do with travel rule. I think this, for those of you that don't know, this is FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, has put out some guidance that says when a virtual asset service provider sends a transaction to another party, information about the sender and receiver should be exchanged. And this wasn't built into Bitcoin. This is basically like recreating kind of the SWIFT network, another way of providing extra metadata about that transaction between the two parties. Certain jurisdictions are certainly much more ahead of others, but BitGo, kind of being a player that has clients all over the globe, really has to understand how they're affected by these different regulations. You'll see in Switzerland, specifically for travel rule, I believe they're stating that before you can actually send the transaction, you need to identify and know who the receiving party is, not just the address, but actually who that institution is and the person on the other end of that transaction before the transaction is sent. So slight check that must go through before you can actually send the transaction. That will probably not be the regulation elsewhere in the globe. So developing a solution that has the ability to be utilized in a way that satisfies clients in one jurisdiction and meet their obligations versus clients in other jurisdictions, certainly interesting. Another aspect we're seeing out of Japan, I think the Financial Services Agency there is saying that if you're operating a crypto business there and hold clients' funds in a hot wallet, you need to store an equivalent one-to-one amount of those assets in cold wallets, essentially self-insuring the wallets or the assets keeping in hot wallets. So that puts an interesting twist on some of the businesses that have been growing in Japan, both operationally and from a technology standpoint, is how are they going to change their products or work with their partners to be able to utilize cold storage more frequently, potentially on a daily basis, and how does that product end up affecting their end users and affecting their ability to access their funds.
Yeah, I'll hop in. So what's important to Anchorage is that we're regulated in the United States as a qualified custodian in the US. And what we do very well is to support new assets upon launch, which is a huge phenomenon, especially that's happening this year, post a lot of very large raises and having these amazing teams come to market. And so what we find in situations where we support a new asset upon launch is that earlier investors may have pockets of geographic concentration. And it's really important for us to make sure that we KYC pretty rigorously every one of our clients. And so for us, it's making sure that we can fully and transparently have consistency when KYC is sometimes less transparent.
How about the European perspective, guys? What's the regulatory picture look like there?
Well, it depends on where you are in Europe. I mean, France has been very active on this front. The current president, when he was the Ministry of Economy, was very crypto friendly. Even ended up writing in the law that you could write non-listed assets in a dispositif d'enregistrement électronique partagé, so basically a blockchain, just to say it in English. And what followed is very open-minded towards blockchain at large, but the local regulator, our local SEC, let's say, has had a lot of trouble understanding really what it meant to come up with what Alex was saying in the beginning. Like, what does it mean to own the key? What does it mean to own the asset? Like the first draft, when they were trying to create a license for being a service provider on crypto assets, they stated that this party should be able to pass the key to another party for service continuation, which basically doesn't make sense. Like you won't copy paste the private key and send it to someone else. So making them understand that there might be a sort of a shift in paradigm, that suddenly the ownership paradigm lies in the key, and this ownership on the key, and it really has to change the way that the regulation is being drafted. Was kind of hard, but we are going towards the right direction now, I think, in France. And the European Commission has also been very proactive in this. They started the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum, just to gather all the experts in Europe and make them discuss about various topics and try to come up with something at some point. I think it would be really good for Europe to have to the European Union at large to have a specific guideline, a specific directive on what to do. It's not happening yet, but it will happen soon, I think. And what it means for Ledger is that obviously we are trying to reach all over the world for clients. So we need to be aware of what's happening everywhere. Japanese market is very important for us, as well as the American market. And we usually play the card that, here's the argument. Like we never control the key. We don't have any control of the key whatsoever. So it's our client's responsibility to store it properly and to accommodate with whatever the regulators would want. And we are definitely here to help also the regulator understand what they are doing. And when they need to have a license, we have set up a joint venture with Komainu and Global Advisors. With Nomura and Global Advisors, that's called Komainu, and it's regulated in Jersey, and we have a regulated custodian in this case. But it's really hard to have a one-size-fits-all, let's say.
I mean, I think that the biggest kind of shift in Europe is the introduction of the fifth AML directive, which defines two new obligated entities, which is a custodian wallet provider and a crypto exchange. Previously, they just didn't exist. Mm-hmm. It also brings into the fold this definition of utility tokens and exchange tokens. So utility token canonical example would be Ethereum's Ether, and then the exchange token is Bitcoin. So the fifth AML directive has been defined, but there's no mention of the travel rule. So Chris makes a great point because there's still an issue. The other thing I expected to happen was that there would be passporting rules for the custodian wallet provider license, which would have given Europe a massive advantage, because actually you have a massive market with potentially a relatively homogeneous regulation. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. And so each member state right now is enforcing their own sets of regulations to meet the fifth AML directive. I think there's a massive opportunity for European market to actually harmonize and passport. The harmonization is done. It's the passport thing that's the important bit. So I think there's plenty of opportunity in Europe to make that better and make Europe one of the leading kind of houses for crypto. But the other thing is, it's kind of really that definition of cold storage, of ownership, of commingled versus segregated. And I think this has been completely underexplored even to this date. So, for instance, we went in initially with a crime insurance because we were one of the first kind of HSM-based solutions, so fast and very secure, but not technically cold storage. But actually, we're now kind of approaching a phase where Specie Market, which underwrites the old cold storage solutions, is now prepared to ensure HSM-based solutions as though they're vaulted solutions. So what is hot and what is cold now? I think that definition is kind of out of date as well. Existing enforcement, so the Japanese rule just doesn't make sense. And then, of course, it is back to the question of, if you're a custodian looking at omnibus accounts, then the issue there is you now have a private subledger that decommingles assets. So now you have new operational risks. And because you are commingling assets, there's no way you can prove that you're not lending those assets. So if you go back to UK's FCA, there's a chapter 6 that talks about custody of assets. And actually, all of it applies if you are doing omnibus accounts, because you need to prove record keeping and not lending and stuff like that. But you can check that book away if you use segregated keys, because actually decentralized ledgers remove much of that complexity. So again, we really, really need to start carefully looking at the new risk factors and make it nuanced. So there's the latest paper from the Swiss organization, I can't remember the name of it, which is the first one which I've seen that mentions the 4 different grades of crypto custody, from omnibus accounts through to segregated, and talks about different risk profiles and actually potentially different regulatory regimes for each of the different models. So I think that is really important, that we don't have a stupid blanket regulation that isn't fit for purpose, because crypto custody is very different depending on how you do that. So yeah, I would say just kind of let's make sure that we really understand what regulation is, what risks the regulation is mitigating. And there's plenty of benefit to regulation, but it has to be fit for purpose. And that's just something I would remind people to look at. But actually, don't worry about regulation in some cases. Where regulation hasn't caught up, I would ask clients to think through, and they can talk to any 4 of us here on the call. I'm sure we'll give them good advice. But actually, what are your risks? Because regulation, in the end, is there to protect our clients. And until the regulation catches up, then you have to talk to experts in the industry like us to give you a little bit of advice. And for all of us are here to talk about.
Yeah, certainly interesting. Alex, you getting a question in the chat. Did you reference a custody report? Which one was it that you were referencing?
It's a Swiss one, and I can't remember. I will have to catch up and follow up. So it's getting late, and my brain is not functioning to the same extent. But it's got a French name, so Jerome, maybe you will remember that one.
Maybe it's Bitcoin Swiss. I'm not sure.
I will chat somebody to see if it's CMTA.
CMTA, okay.
So if you go for CMTA, and thank you, Mia. Mia's my awesome head of marketing. She just chatted me, so thank you so much.
answering questions in real time in the chat. You got to love that. Amazingly, this session has, or maybe not as surprisingly, has flown by. I think we're going to be getting teed up for our next presentation here in a few minutes. But if folks have questions from the audience, I encourage you to get them in now. Any key topics, guys, that's relevant for this audience of investors, crypto and traditional companies that we have not touched on yet? Any points that you want to impress or share with folks that we haven't talked about? Now's the time. Why don't we start with Trisha? We can go in a circle.
Yeah, that's a great question. Can I answer second or third?
You sure can. Chris.
I'm just extending. I mean, we've spent some time talking about regulation, and the fact that there are folks talking about cold wallets and cold storage and stuff like this just shows that the industry is catching up. The governments are catching up. So it's interesting that it just further cements and legitimizes the industry, and maybe as technologists we're ahead of the legal framework, but we're having those conversations now to help have a meaningful conversation and explain maybe where, if they were copying and pasting regulation from a traditional market and bringing it into crypto, it doesn't work the same way. So I just think it's a positive sign that we're seeing.
Jerome.
Sadly, we didn't have much time to talk about DeFi. I love DeFi. I love Ethereum as well as many other blockchains.
Let's spend 2 minutes on DeFi. Why don't you introduce why that's important as it relates to custody?
Because it removes more intermediaries. I mean, the thing is, DeFi, sometimes we say decentralized finance, but I think we should more say disintermediated finance, because a lot of the functions gets automated, and at the very end of the road there is the custodian and safekeeping the keys that will activate the smart contracts. So there are in many cases critical keys in those setup. So that's a new use case for custodians. For those of you that are familiar with smart contracts, sometimes you have to define roles inside those smart contracts that are linked to specific keys to change stuff here and there. So that's something where crypto custodians will at some point probably be useful. In addition, with bringing more volume on the protocols themselves, and thus making the keys that we safekeep even more useful themselves. We recently announced that we are joining the Liquid Federation. So things are happening on Ethereum, also on Bitcoin, and many other protocols. So it's definitely a very interesting things to see happening. And to answer Adrian Caron questions, can I share Ledger hardware sales? I cannot comment on numbers, but we are still recruiting and doing well. So extrapolate how you want.
I guess I'll hop in now. So I think that the only one thing from Anchorage is this panel is about the institutional participation in crypto. And for those of us that have been in the industry or the asset class for at least a few years, know that this question has been on the top of everyone's mind for a while. And we know that from at least being on the front lines of the participation in the industry by institutions as a crypto native custodian, is that the two main barriers to investing in this asset class were, one, regulatory uncertainty, and two, lack of infrastructure. And the second one is here, where it's been solved, and the regulatory uncertainty is making baby steps. And so we know that right now we've seen a massively, and it hasn't been like a turning point where everyone, all this capital is pouring into the industry, but we do know that more and more, it's kind of like a snowball that's been growing. More and more and more participants are flooding to this market, and that's not even just a portfolio that's 1% Bitcoin. It's pure funds that potentially have an entire portfolio dedicated to staking returns. It's that, or even by setting up an indirect investment vehicle like a fund of funds. But we have never seen as much interest and demand for Anchorage custody ever, and I think that's a good sign for the industry. So if institutional participation, is it coming? We see it every day, and we think it's already here.
Right. Alex, anything else to touch on?
Echo on
Before you hit
DeFi. Echo on the DeFi. Why DeFi? I think it's going to be a heck of a lot cheaper than existing solutions in the long term, and I think it's going to have much deeper liquidity. So if you get into DeFi, you're going to make more money. I mean, it's a simple kind of statement. As to why do you need custody in DeFi? Because you need to inject KYC, you need to inject AML, you need to worry about joining the reliever, because you can't unforget the keys. So single user solutions don't work. And you need to worry about alerting for margin call events. There's a whole host of things that you need to worry about, where the custodians like us, we support DeFi straight out of the box with all those solutions, can help. So I would suggest people kind of to check it out, because I think this is a massive opportunity going forward. And then the other thing that I think we need to start shifting the perspective around custody. Too often we talk about really boring stuff like, you're going to lose all your money, That's true, but actually the much more exciting bit is our clients come to us because they figured out that if they partner with a custodian that's trusted, they'll make more money. Why? 2 reasons. One, because their investors will trust them more with their cash if they're backed up by a custodian that they trust, because we lowered operational risk, allowing more access to be trusted to the kind of the operator. And then the other bit is we remove the time they do stupid things that do not create alpha, like moving funds, and we allow smart people to focus on the alpha. So by giving people time back to focus on alpha and reducing the risk in order for more money to flow, because we de-risk the situation, we actually propel the entire industry to greater heights. So I think we should be really focusing on how we help people make money rather than just being really boring insurance people that kind of just make sure you don't lose your money. So I think do come to us as people who will help you make more money.
There you have it. Great commentary from industry leaders in crypto and crypto asset custody, BitGo, Ledger, Trustology, and Anchorage. These folks, for everyone listening, are at the forefront. It was an evolving space and needed some important things to be built 3+ years ago, when probably many of us were getting started. And it's just like that again today. So you really need to look to the right providers, the right experts who understand this, who understand the security issues and everything else that comes with it. So hope the audience took away some good color from this. And I am going to relieve you all of your duties. I'll let you go from the panel. Enjoy the rest of the event. We're going to shift now into another presentation, but thank you guys. Have a good day. Good night.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thanks. Bye.
Congratulations to the Messari team for this wonderful event. Really cool. Very nice to have been chatting with you guys.
Agreed.
Thanks a lot, Tom.